Our next speaker is Enges, Pierre's son. In his own words here, he's saying, having visited Stanford many times as a child with his father, Nick always wanted to study it. Fortunately, to the great relief of his parents, when the time came to apply, he was accepted. That's a compliment. While at Stanford, the first class Nick took his freshman year was his father's popular introductory seminar on GPS. After graduating from Stanford with a master's in Earth Systems, Nick stayed on campus to teach a variety of classes, including several evolutions of a class on electric automobiles and aircraft with his father. He is now a lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin, where he teaches social ballroom dancing, swing, waltz, salsa, etc., with his wife, Melissa. Please welcome Nick.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for having me here today to talk about the story of the Enges from Norway to NorCal. And it will be a saga because it is a Norwegian story, and Norwegian stories, all good ones at least, are sagas. So, we're going to start with the origin of Enga. Where did this come from? Where did the family come from? Where did the name come from? So we know it actually all the way back to the late 17th century. We know that there was a guy named Ole in our family. We don't know what his last name was, but we know that his name was Ole because we know his son's name. His son's name was John Olsen, and Olsen literally means son of Ole. So back in time, and for many generations before and after, they had the patronymic naming system in Norway. So basically, the father's first name became the last name of his children. So if you were the son of Ole, you became Olsen. That was your last name. If you were the daughter of Ole, your maiden name was Ole's daughter. So Johansson, Hansen, all of these names that we've heard, they're just because they're the son of that person. We'll see, eventually it stopped changing every generation, but for now, we'll see that it changed every generation. So, John Olsen had a son, John Johnson. He named his son after himself. But John was the son of John, so he became John Johnson. John Johnson had a son. He was also the son of John, it happened. So he was David Johnson. Now, this is not because he is the grandson of John. This is because he's the son of John. There are going to be lots of Johns here. We're going to have lots of Johnsons, but it's not because Johnson is the family name. It's just because there were lots of Johns in the family. Now, in around 1800, there was John Davidson. He took his grandfather's name, but he was the son of David, so he became John Davidson. It's very confusing back in Scandinavian genealogy. In 1837, we had Hans Johnson. He was also the son of John. Again, no relation, well, kind of a relation, but no direct relation to John Olsen and John Johnson, those names, but simply because John Davidson was his father and he was the son, so he became Hans Johnson. An interesting thing happened in 1850, though. The family moved from the farm to the city, and at the time, if you moved from the farm to the city, you would often take the name of the farm as your last name instead of keeping this patronymic system that we had. And this makes some sense. If you live on the farm, you have maybe 3 families nearby. There's a Johnson family, there's a Hansen family, there's an Olsen family. If you get in the city, you have 100 families nearby, and there are 5 Olsen families and 6 Johnson families. It gets a little complicated. So they decided to have different names as they took the name of the farm. So Hans Johnson's son was Martin Enge, and he was named for the Enge farm. That was the farm that they came from. So what does this word Enge mean? It actually means the meadow. If you look it up on Google Translate, sketchy things happen with our family names when you look them up on Google Translate. It says that Enge means angel. And if you say that we're the angel family, we'll take that and we'll say, yes, we are the angel family. Thank you for thinking that. But that's not actually what it means. Eng in Norwegian means meadow, and is simply the article that you add to the end of it, so it's the meadow. Pronunciation-wise, you probably know, because you probably have met there, that we have Americanized it as Enga. That's how we generally say it. If you ask people in Norway, if you go and check in and they say, oh, are you Norwegian? And we say, yes, we kind of are, at least we came from there. They'll say Enge. So it's like Eng, E-N-G, with a kind of little bit of a Y and an E, so Enge. But Enga is perfectly fine. That's a slightly Americanized version. But it's not Eng, it's not NG, it's not Eng, it's not any of these things. Enga or Enga if you want to be super authentic. So, interestingly, in 1875, the whole of Norway, they passed a law in Norway saying that we're going to do this with all of the names. It wasn't necessarily the farm name for everyone, but if you had the Hansen family, even in 1875, you were going to be Hansen from then on. We were going to stop this whole nonsense of the patronymic naming thing. But they said, no, we don't really want to do that. Maybe we want to keep the patronymic naming thing, or maybe they didn't like the Hansen name, and they wanted to go back to Johnson, because we had lots of Johnsons back there. So in Norway, they kind of revolted against this, and they said, no, we're going to keep changing the name. In 1905, 30 years later, they passed the same law again and said, no, seriously, this time you actually need to keep your name. So since 1905, it has actually been frozen in Norway. So I like to think we were ahead of the curve, Martin Enge in 1873 rather than 1875 with everyone else. His son was Harold Enge, my grandfather. His son was Per Enge, and so what does Per mean? We talk about what Enge means, but what does Per mean? Again, if you put it in Google Translate, it will say PER means PER, as it is in English, per percent. In Norwegian, it means the same thing. But in fact, it actually is just a version of Peter, or Pierre, or Pedro. All of the different languages have their version of this. So if you ever went to coffee with my father, or you went to a restaurant and saw him get the reservation, you often would use the name Pierre instead, because he'd say pear, and they're like, oh, the fruit? And he's like, no, not the fruit. Just Pierre in a different language. But he liked Pierre. He liked to be a little bit more fancy like that. Sometimes he would play with the Starbucks baristas, and he would say, my name is Pedro. And they look at him, and you're like, you're not a Pedro. Except there was one, according to him, there was one Hispanic barista one day who gave him no luck, was like, yeah. He had a lot of fun with that, but it simply means Peter. So he's Peter Meadows, and all of these, Peter, Pierre, Pedro, they all mean rock. So his name fully translated means rock in the meadow. In 1987, I came along and I'm giving this presentation. Won't be about me, it'll be mostly about him and Harold and Martin, but I am here, so I thought I'd include myself on the tree. So the family mostly comes from really northern Norway. Harold Enge, where our story is going to begin, comes from Fauske, Norway. This is above the Arctic Circle, so all the wonderful things, eternal night, eternal sunshine, aurora borealis, all of that stuff happens up there. It's also just really cold. That will play a part in the story in just a moment. Fauske, if you want to know what that means, it means old and rotten trees. It's the plural of Fausker, which means old and rotten tree. It was named after a farm that apparently had lots of old and rotten trees. We've been there. It's a nice place. It's not old and rotten trees anymore, but that's where the name comes from. So as I said, our story is going to begin with the first Enge, Martin Enge, born in 1873. Even though they had moved to the city at the time he began his life as a farmhand, it was still pretty rural and still is in Fauske. So he began his life as a farmhand. He then moved to become an iron miner, but then found out that he could make more money as a cod fisherman. You might say, that sounds odd. It seems like cod fishing would be a nicer, cushier job. You're on a boat, you're being a Viking, you're sailing the seas. No, in fact, the cod spawning season in Norway is January and February. So it's really cold, as I said, up north of the Arctic Circle, but you get paid well for it, because it's a hard job. So he took all of that money and put it into his education. It was free education, but as he said, he needed to have his living expenses taken care of, so he saved up some money for those. He trained to be a teacher, then eventually became the headmaster of a county school in Fauske. Then after that, he became a government school inspector. He went around and made sure all the woodworking shops were up to code. And then finally, he sat at his desk at the age of 65 and said, I'm going to write books and write speeches. Apparently, he was a very sought-after public speaker and talked at all of the different holiday events. And he also wrote an award-winning book about a Fedra vi og våra barn, which means our forefathers, we, and our children. And he basically argued for a more practical education. So we'll see in a second, actually I'll show you now, this is the school that he ran, the Fauske Fylkesskolen. So we see Martin here and his wife Marie. So that is my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. She looks kind of serious there. She looks in many of the pictures I've seen of her. But anyway, this was basically, if you take your 7 years of compulsory education and you go out into the workforce and then you want some more practical education, this is where you go to get it, whether it's carpentry for the gentlemen or nutrition and food for the women at the time, this was where you went. So he was basically arguing for more of this practical education. He said, who needs to learn calculus? Okay, maybe his son and his grandson and his great-grandson need to learn calculus, but not everyone needs to learn calculus. Some people want to do carpentry, and this is a view that's actually very popular in Norway today. At the beginning of high school, you'll decide whether you want to be a carpenter or whether you want to be a nuclear physics professor, as his son went on to be. And basically, they just say, we're going to train you for whatever you want, and they're both equally good. We need carpenters in the world, we need people building things, so let's train you for that rather than making you learn advanced nuclear physics when you don't want to. But as it so happened, his son did want to. So here's his son, Harold Enge, born in 1920. He went through those 7 years of education, then decided he wanted to go to his parents' school, or maybe his parents decided that he should go to their school, I don't know. But he went through that, and then he decided that he wanted to actually pursue this university education. So he went to the equivalent of high school in Buda, which is about 30 miles from Fauska, I think it's 30 miles east, and it's a little bit bigger of a city. And so he was preparing for his university entrance exams until one day they said, everyone needs to go home. We need to leave the school because the Nazis are going to bomb the city. And in fact, unfortunately, they did. This is a few days after he left the city. 80% of the buildings in the city were leveled, so it was very lucky that the school got advance notice of this and sent them all home. Unfortunately, as he was biking home, he also ran into a black cloud, not this exact black cloud, but a black cloud very much like this, because Fauska, his city, was also being bombed. Luckily, the Enges and he were safe. So he then actually went back to Fauska, and he spent the time, basically what the Nazis were doing was they wanted to take over Norway, and they wanted to keep everyone alive, because they like blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, so they want to kill everyone, but they want to have a show of force to say, let us come over and take over and Nazify Norway, and so they had all of these bombing campaigns, so there was a while where they kind of had to lay low. So Harold laid particularly low. He went back to Fauska, and he repaired radios over the summer in the basement of this building, which is now a radio museum in Fauska. And those are the kind of radios that he would have been repairing at the time. And he just tells the story. We have a whole bunch of different autobiographical documents that he wrote, and he repaired radios in this building over the summer, no big deal. Yes, good deal. So as soon as the Nazis came to Norway, they banned radios entirely. They didn't want them to, know when they were going to bomb. They didn't want them to listen to the news from the Allies. They didn't want any of this. And it was punishable by death to own a radio. Now, fixing the radio was probably even worse than that, but luckily he was not caught. But he just says, humbly tells the story, I just repaired radios, and you have to know the historical context. That was a very dangerous thing to be doing. So he eventually went back. It became safe. They said, okay, we have Nazified Norway. You can go about your business as long as you don't get in our way. So he went to Trondheim University to study electrical engineering. Here's a picture of Trondheim University. There's a great picture that will be in the slideshow if you're there on Saturday for the Celebration of Life of Per standing right in front of there. We went to visit. It was a very cool experience to go visit where Harold got his degree. So it was all going well. Again, this history repeats itself until they got word that they needed to disperse from school again and go back home because it was not safe there. And what happened this time was they had gotten word that at the University of Oslo, the students and faculty had revolted. The Nazis said, we're going to Nazify, and we're going to kind of use this University of Oslo to train the future Nazi leaders of Norway. And the university students and faculty said, no, you're not. They burned down one of the dining halls, which made the Nazis very angry. So they arrested all 1,250 people who were working and studying there, and they sent half of them to Buchenwald for re-education. So actually, Harold's best friend from Fauska, Harold Bugge, Harold and Harold were best friends. He actually went to the concentration camp and sadly died of tuberculosis. So Harold kind of narrowly avoided all of these things, but there were people in the family and the family friends who were very much affected by this. So he got his degree here, then went on to the University of Bergen to study for his PhD. Here's the University of Bergen. This might in fact be the physics building there. And he actually got an opportunity then to go to the United States, to MIT. There were 75 people from around the world, all different countries, who were invited to come do research at MIT. MIT was like, we can make research around the world better, as Americans sometimes think that we can. But in fact, they did. They brought a bunch of people from around the world and had them do research and taught them to do really cool things. And Harold went to MIT. So at MIT, Harold actually discovered a new state. I think it was a new energy state of aluminum, something like that. He was supposed to be there for 4 months. They said, we're actually going to extend, stay a year more. He said, no, I have to actually get back to, I have work that I need to do at Bergen too. So he went back to Bergen, but then they sent him a telegram and said, can we come see you in Bergen? We really want to talk about something. And so he invited them to come to Bergen and took them up the Hurtigruten, which is the ship that goes up the coast of Norway. If you haven't done that, if you haven't visited Norway, first of all visit Norway, then go on the ship because it's really cool. You go in all the fjords. But anyway, so he took them on that trip, and they said, we really want you to permanently come to the United States. We actually want you to teach as an instructor at MIT. We really need your brain. And he said, cool, can you get me a visa? And they said, yes. So basically, they petitioned the government for, right now it's called an O1 visa. It's essentially an outstanding individual visa where your brain is so important to the future of this country that we need you to come here, and by the way, your family can come here too. It's not actually an immigrant visa. It just means that you can come here and you can stay here indefinitely. So another famous holder currently of an O1 visa is Justin Bieber. He's important enough to serve America that he's allowed to stay. Harold Enga, Justin Bieber, don't know which is better, but two totally different fields. So they all came over on an O1 visa. So here is actually the manifest of the Motorship Tennessee where they came over. So you can see here we have Harold Enga, his wife Greta, who we'll talk about in just a second. This is Per's older half-brother Shell, who was son of Greta from a previous marriage, and then Per. So Per was born, but we'll get back to that. We want to finish up this generation, then we'll get to Per's generation. And it looks like they were well taken care of. So there's a note here, actually, about Greta Enga. Looks like she was quarantined for something. If anyone is really good at reading this old thing on the manifest, come talk to me. I'd love to know what it means. But I guess they were in a first-class cabin, so they were well taken care of on their way from Bergen to Boston. All right, so here is Harold teaching at MIT. Here he is, the caption of this says that this is his stand-in for cross-country skis. He's teaching the principles of friction using cross-country skiing, but standing on this sketchy rolling cart in front of his introductory physics class at MIT. And here he is magnetically levitating a mannequin in front of his students. So I like to think that he and Per and I all like to have great innovations in teaching methods, really work on student engagement. All right, so we should also talk about my father's mother, my grandmother, Greta Enga, because she was also quite a remarkable individual. So she met Harold when he was working at the University of Bergen, and they came over on the Motorship Tennessee together. When she came over, she was taking care of the kids, Shell and Per's younger brother Eric, for a while. But once they were kind of, old enough to play by themselves, she decided that she needed to do something else with her free time while overseeing the kids. And so she got together with Harold and started a company, the Proton Company. And she was actually doing microscopy work for Argonne National Lab in the Enga family playroom while they were playing. She actually had a team of 3 female microscopists who were all they were basically Argonne National Lab needed to outsource this to someone, and so they outsourced it to the Enga house. After that, in the 1970s, this kind of work was made obsolete, and so she was not one to rest on her laurels. Instead, she decided to go back and get a further education, and so she studied fine art. So this is a painting by Edvard Munch, and she wrote her thesis for her master's in fine art on the cultural climate in Norway at the time of Edvard Munch and the effect upon his art. Apparently the cultural climate was not good because his art is all like this. But so she was a woman of many different talents and interests. All right, so here we go. Here is Per, born in 1953. And so here he is, I believe at 1.5 years old. He was still in Norway at the time. Here he is in elementary school, and there he is in high school. All right, so here is the house where he was born in. He was born in Bergen, and he was born in the house because I believe a couple years earlier, maybe 2 years earlier, he had an older brother, Christian, who was born in the hospital, and then his older brother sadly died of meningitis shortly thereafter. So Greta kind of got this idea that hospitals were bad places, and so she never wanted to go back there. So she said, get me a midwife, I'm going to have Per in the master bedroom of this house. And so that's what they did. He was born at Solasen 30 in Bergen. We also went and visited that a few years back. That was also really cool. All of the important family locations are still standing, which is cool. Once they moved to Massachusetts, they lived at 26 Prince Ave in Winchester. And this is where I like to think that Per's interest in science and technology developed. He liked to tell the story of how he was in the basement one day with his friend, and they were trying to make rocket fuel in the basement. Great idea. And they almost blew up the house in the process. Not such a great idea. And they actually had to scramble out of one of those tiny little high-up basement windows that you have on basements. But luckily the fire was put out, and the house is still standing today. So despite this kind of extracurricular interest in science and technology, he was not necessarily the best student. He ran into obituary in the Stanford News Service. I am quoted as saying that he was a middling student, and this is my source for this. You can see no A's. We'd expect, A+ gentlemen, but Per, no, not so much, at least in high school. And this, I believe, in chemistry. In chemistry, his rocket fuel got him a B+ the next year, but generally speaking, B- and C's were where it was at, until he met his future wife, Elaine, sitting here in the front row, at UMass Amherst. So as the story goes, they were in the same freshman dorm together, and she decided that she was very interested in him. So she asked a male mutual friend to go to Per and say, Per, please ask her out, she's interested in you. In fact, this male mutual friend also had an interest in Elaine, so that message took a while to be conveyed. But eventually it was, and he asked her out, and so they went to the bar on campus. The drinking age was 18 then, so there was a huge bar. In fact, it was the largest bar east of the Mississippi, I read, called the Blue Wall. And so they went on their first date there and went to a movie, and then they continued to date from there. So, this is the W.B. Du Bois Library on UMass campus, and this plays a very important role in the story. So Pierre at the time was more interested in just hanging out with his friends and chilling, and Elaine was very studious. She liked to hang out in the library and study. She was there at school to study, so she was going to study in the library. So Pierre very quickly learned that if he wanted to hang out with her, he was going to be hanging out in the library, like it or not. So that's where they hung out, and so that's where he really got his kind of scholarly academic side from. Interesting story about this. Apparently, I was told just last night that at the time they had a problem with all of the plate glass windows falling out of the upper stories in this library. So there was kind of caution tape around the edge. You kind of had to, duck into the entrance so you were not crushed by a plate glass window. But luckily they were not. They survived to continue on. Here they are. They just graduated from UMass Amherst in mid-1970s. And I like to think that when they were living in their apartment in Bedford, Harold and Greta essentially returned the favor to Pierre of nearly burning down the house. Not really a favor. So basically what happened was they had given them an old dryer, an old used dryer, where the temperature regulator was not working so well. So one night the dryer caught fire, and they were only saved by their cat, Solglimt, which is Norwegian for glimmer of sunlight, angrily scratching at their door. But luckily they were saved. So I'm expecting sometime in my life either my mother or my children are going to try to burn down my house, so I'm ready for that. I've got a fire extinguisher ready. Hopefully not, but that seems to be a recurring theme in the Enges family history. All right, so after they graduated here, they decided they wanted to go to grad school together at the University of Illinois. I've always heard them say Champaign-Urbana. Apparently it's actually Urbana-Champaign, but whatever, Champaign-Urbana, Urbana-Champaign, tomato, tomato. So he continued to study electrical engineering here at Illinois. As they were driving from Massachusetts to Illinois, they had her 65 Mustang hooked up to the back of a U-Haul. At the time, there wasn't really like a tow hook that you hook things up to. Instead, you just hook it up to the front bumper. And so as they were driving through Pennsylvania, the front bumper of the Mustang fell off. And so she needed to get out and get in the Mustang, and he drove the U-Haul. And she, of course, she was terrified that she was going to get lost. So little did she know that her future husband would be so integral to a technology that would have alleviated her fears then, but that GPS did not exist at that time to save them. So here they are. They got married while they were at the University of Illinois, seen dancing in the driveway here. And he also got his citizenship at the time. So this whole time he was on that outstanding O3 visa. It is now its family of an outstanding individual visa. And he very luckily got his citizenship because they had a good citizenship test examiner. She needed to be there, Elaine needed to be there to vouch for him. And so the examiner asked, "How long have you known Pierre?" And she very honestly, as the honest woman she is, replied 5 years. To which the examiner said, "I'm sure I heard you say 6 years." And they understood that, yes, they should probably say 6 years because she needed to have known him for 6 years for this to be a valid reference. So yeah, yes, we've known each other for 6 years. So luckily he got his citizenship. He's a very proud American from then on. So after he graduated with a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois, went on to work in industry for a little while, worked at a family friend, Eric Johannessen's company, Megapulse, which was making Loran transmitters. And then went to Boston University as an instructor for a while, and then became a professor at WPI. A couple years into his professorship at WPI, I was born. Here he is as the proud father. So he was a proud and loving, but apparently very nervous father. So they took me home in the car seat, and Elaine told me the story earlier today, how they walk in the door, and he's carrying the car seat, and he's like, "What do I do with him now?" And she says, "Take him out of the car seat and put him in the crib." So it was a learning curve, but he was a great father for the early years and all throughout life as well. So after that, about 5 years later, it was time for him to go on sabbatical, and there were multiple places where he was considering. Apparently London was in consideration, but he was also asked to come to Stanford, and the weather of Stanford won out, so we ended up all moving across the country to do his sabbatical at Stanford. Then, like Harold had been a hit at MIT, luckily Pierre was a hit here. I say luckily because Elaine had decided that she didn't want to go back to Massachusetts. The weather of California was better. And I had made some good friends in kindergarten. So he had to swing a job, full-time job, either at Stanford or somewhere else. And luckily, in the end, it ended up being Stanford. And had many, many good years here. So you probably all, as colleagues, actually know more about the rest of the story than I do. So I'm going to, I believe we have a whole list of people who are going to tell stories about later times in Per's life, starting with Tom. But again, I want to thank you for having me here to talk about his early life.
We have several individuals who have volunteered to speak. I'm going to go ahead and lead off. I kind of regret that now after Nick's fun. I had a few things I was going to say. I was going to say afterwards there's some refreshments, but I think you guys all found that beforehand. I would also say that everybody's going to talk for a couple minutes, so maybe hold off on the applause until the end, if you could do that. Okay, I met Per when he came to Stanford as a visiting scholar. This was way back in the early 1990s, some 25 years ago. At that time, Per really jumped into what we were doing. He became instrumental in helping lead the early WAS and LOS programs with the FAA. It was obvious to everybody that Per had a brilliant technical mind. He was also a very good manager of people and programs. In short order, we made him a Stanford employee, and soon afterwards, the Aeroastro department made him a professor in the Aeroastro department. I worked with Per on several different projects over the years. In particular, Per had a great influence over this symposium. He was the one who handpicked most of the speakers we invited. Per and I took a number of trips together. On a couple of occasions, we visited Taiwan and China. And I want to tell you about one of those trips. We were in Beijing in late January of 2015, visiting Tsinghua University, and the Super Bowl was being played that weekend. Per and I are both football fans, and of course we wanted to watch the game. Per especially since the New England Patriots were playing. And Per is a big-time fan of all things Boston. Those Boston roots were really deep. Most of you probably didn't know that. We had a little problem though. With the time zone change, the Super Bowl was scheduled to start at 6:30 on Monday morning. We also found out we couldn't find any place that was showing the game. So after a lot of poking around, Per found a very elegant solution to our problem. He oftentimes found elegant solutions to things. He discovered that our hotel TV service had a channel that was broadcasting the game. So we met in Per's room early that Monday morning. It was actually a lot of fun hanging out and watching the game with him. And as I recall, we had rice crackers and tea. There were no commercials on the broadcast that we were receiving, so that was kind of a real change, a nice change. It was actually a very good game too. It looked like New England's opponent, the Seattle Seahawks, were just about to score the winning touchdown at the end of the game. They'd been pounding the ball, some of you football fans probably know, pounding the ball down the field, and they were on about the 1-yard line when, for some crazy reason, they decided to throw a pass. And New England promptly intercepted it. That was the game New England won. Watching good old mild-mannered Pear go all ballistic at that moment was great. He was just kind of dancing around the room saying, yes, yes, yes. I'm going to always treasure that moment and that memory of him. He was a great colleague and a friend, and I miss him dearly. Chris Hager.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Haggerty. I'm with MITRE, and I just learned today that I've known Pear as long as Nick has. Because when you were being born into this world, I was a scrawny 18-year-old in my freshman year at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And my first meeting of Pear actually was for my second electrical engineering class at WPI, and I ended up missing the first month of the class because I had this pesky thing where my lungs kept collapsing, so I was out for a while. And now I know why he passed me so quickly when I went back. You were probably keeping him up. Thank you very much, because he gave me a couple of quizzes and said, yeah, you're good, and walked on from that. And I didn't really interact with Pear very much, except for 4 years later, when I actually went back to WPI for my master's degree, and I was nearly done with my first year in full panic, of course, because a procrastinator that I am, I had no idea who I was going to do my thesis with, what I was going to do it on, or anything else. And the whole reason that I'm now, how many years later, 30-something years later, doing GPS and working for the same company since then, is all because of Pear. I heard he was a nice guy. I should talk to him and see about maybe doing a thesis with him. So I did talk to Pear. He was working on this weird new system, GPS or something like that. It sounded good. He had money, and whatever, I can do that. I never, never dreamed that I'd still be doing this stuff, this many years later. But Pear was awesome to work for. I couldn't have asked for a better mentor, friend, and professor, but he set me up with a couple of interesting jobs. At the time, he was actually doing work on the JIC that you young people may not have heard of, but you old people do remember. That was the precursor of what later became WASP and more generally SBAS. And he was also working with the Coast Guard on the precursor for what later became the Coast Guard Maritime Differential System and then NGPS. So those were the two projects I worked on. Actually was employed that summer, which was great, making cash at WPI, driving down from Chelmsford, which is 2 towns over from where I recall you lived at the time. I think it was in Groton, Mass, is that right? Yeah. It was a fantastic experience. Pear once told me with a big guffaw that trust me, we're all prima donnas, describing himself in the faculty, but Pear wasn't like that at all. He really was absolutely down to earth, go do anything for his students, and that was very much appreciated. It was clear working for Pear that he loved his family very much. I remember still he gave some of us his password to get on the computer network to use the printers, and his password was Elaine. A dot in the middle, undoubtedly, because they forced him to have some non-alphabet numeric thing there. It was interesting times. Some of you, Lisa Beatty is here from ION, but back in those days, that was probably before you were there, Lisa, but submitting papers was interesting. They gave us poster board material where you had to actually print out any paper you submitted. The text was printed separately, and the pictures, you glued them up and then brought them down to the ION office to photocopy and put in the proceedings. I finished my master's thesis in 1992. Pear, at the time, was an associate editor for Navigation, the journal of the Institute of Navigation, and he was working with Ron Braff, who at the time was the main editor. And Pear got me an interview at MITRE, which is where I'm still employed today. Did some time down in McLean, but then back up to Bedford. 92 wasn't long before Pear went off to come out to the West Coast, of course, on the sabbatical. He told a lot of us in confidence that he hopes Elaine makes it out there because he didn't want to come back. He was hoping to stay, so I'm glad you like the weather out there. He was going, for those of you who don't know why he came out here, his reason was to go work with Brad and Jim and Penny and all the other contributors to the AIAA GPS Blue Books that came out, I guess, with the copyright date in '96, but I think you guys were done probably a little bit before that. And when he came out here, they needed a place to stay, so Pear didn't take that job in London, which was actually with Inmarsat on their own nickel. They were spending money on putting payloads on the Inmarsat 3 satellites for what later was used for WASP. But it worked out very well that A.J. Van Derenok did go to London, and thus there was an empty house that the Enga family could stay in this area. So that's where they lived at first. And A.J. loved Pear like all of us did, but he'd tell you in a grumbling sort of way that when you left that house, you took something from him. What did you take, Elaine, from the Van Derenok household? The phone number. So apparently, I don't know if you still have that home phone number, but if anyone has AJ's number from circa 1990, early, so whatever, you call that number, don't be surprised if Elaine answers the phone. Since I graduated, working at MITRE, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to cross paths with Pear a number of times. We worked on different projects for the FAA. I'm not sure if it was him or Günther Hein who sucked me into it, but I've been participating as an instructor in the same summer school that Pear has gone to every year. I like the last picture from Svalbard. I had gone home. Don't tell anyone, but Frank Digglen and I shared a bed that they didn't have enough hotel space, so the night I flew out, I think Frank came in and got my room. So not quite the story you were expecting. Those are, I guess, all I can think of to share. Pear was a remarkable man. I was privileged to have known him, and it's a privilege to meet you today, Nick and Elaine, to see you again. And so very sorry for your loss and all of our loss. Thank you.
I have to tell you, these things are hard, and I can get real emotional. I'll try not to. So among us, we once had a wonderful, warm-hearted Viking. His name was Pear. Alas, he's no longer with us, but his impact and his memory will linger on, I think, for a very long time. My navigation thing started a long time ago, around 1955, but even earlier, as a young kid, I think I was 9, I developed a love of Norwegians. I don't know why, but I think there was a movie that talked about the Norwegian resistance in 1944. And it was done with a background of Grieg's A minor concerto. And it turned out later that Pear and I went to see Grieg's house in Bergen together. And I remember that. He came to Stanford as a visiting professor, which I loved. And it became clear that there were a variety of pressures on him, among which he enjoyed Stanford. And he finally came to me and he says, and I assumed he was going back to Worcester Polytech. He was already a tenured professor, for heaven's sake. And he said, no, I'm giving that all up. I'd like to stay here. And I said, are you sure? He said, well, I'm not so sure, but my wife is sure. So one thing led to another. You know Cannon's law that I've repeated many times. One thing led to another. And next thing you know, he was an untenured associate professor. And then, I forget what the exact sequence was, but we were talking about that today. Somehow he ended up a tenured professor. which obviously I was very enthusiastic about. I don't want to talk a lot. He's had so many accomplishments, but the things that stand out in my mind are, he always could see ahead, and he could understand where the leverages were. For example, the leverage in WAS. You know, we had this wonderful young fellow named Todd, and we sent him out with a bag of parts and said, set us up this, we called it then a wide area differential system. And we got done, and it was working like, I say we, he and Per got it, let's be honest about it. But we had wonderful data. And finally, we went, you know, FAA, okay, it's time to deploy this thing and declare victory. And then we ran into something called certification and discovered we hadn't even started. And fortunately, Per, Todd, and members of the FAA ended up persevering, because I got a call from the FAA and they said, no, I was in the office of the Deputy FAA Administrator for R&D, I forget his name, I better not say it anymore. But he said, okay, I'd like you to study this and come back to me with recommendations, and by the way, if you recommend canceling, that's okay. So I came back and I said, it's working great, we just can't prove it yet. I think it took you 2 years and many millions of dollars to prove it. But the point is, Per understood that persevering on this was a really good thing for the country. So I could tell a lot of other stories about, he'd laugh about being Norwegian, claiming he had a very dark side, and yet he had such a great sense of humor. Wow. So I miss him a lot. I think you do too. Thank you.
So, ma'am, I just want to let you know how much Per meant to us at the directorate, right? Down south, in Los Angeles at the directorate, we think very highly of the men and women who come before us. Per is one of those people that I sought out when I took over 4 years ago. Brad was another one, but he was always a kind and gentle spirit to me, and always somebody who was very cautious with his words, but very forceful in what he thought was appropriate to do. So I appreciate that. What I want to share with you today is, down at the directorate, we have a GPS Hall of Fame. And in there we have many of the great leaders of GPS that are listed there. And I just want to read for you the inscription that is on the plaque. And so, Per was inducted into the GPS Hall of Fame in 2012 for pioneering GPS innovations leading to the worldwide safety of flight enhancements, specifically guiding the development and testing of early prototypes of the local area augmentation system and the wide area augmentation system integrity, leading the development of future concepts for use of GPS in air traffic control and aviation, including the methods of providing worldwide availability of aircraft vertical guidance, and for co-editing the American Institute for Aeronautics and Astronautics Blue Books, considered widely by many as the standard reference for volumes of GPS. So that was one of just the many reasons why we chose to induct him, and we keep him there as a great man of GPS, and we want to make sure we pay homage. But I do really appreciate all that he's done for us. And so on behalf of the director, I just have a small token. In the Air Force, we have these things, we call them coins. Right? They're given out for great reasons or little reasons, but they're always a special token. And so this is my personal coin as the director of GPS. And on one side's our logo, on the back side's got my signature and number 16, because I'm the 16th guy to do it. I hope you'd accept this and keep this in a special spot. Thank you.
My name is Rudy Kalopis, and I was chairman of the
RTCM Special Committee 104 on differential GNSS services for 25 years. And the reason I tell you that is that I'm going to supply you a missing link that you haven't heard. You heard about Worcester Polytechnic, you heard about Megapulse and Loran, and you haven't heard what was the step from there to GPS, and that's what I want to give you here. I was working for the Transportation Systems Center in the mid-80s, and of course, since I was involved with differential GPS, we saw this as a very valuable service, because at the time, GPS was not operational. That was in the 90s, and it looked like they were going to set under the program of selective availability an accuracy of about 100 meters. Well, we were working with the Coast Guard, and they had a real need for doing a lot better than 100 meters. First of all, they wanted to do very precise buoy placement. They wanted to provide really accurate navigation for the ships, and they wanted to provide what was called harbor and harbor entrance navigation, and to be able to have more like meter level accuracy is what they were looking for. And we had done some preliminary studies and said, hey, you have this whole radio beacon system. You've got a bunch of radio beacons that are already working. They cover exactly the area you're interested in. And it kind of looks like you would be able to modify those in such a way as to put out a differential message. And this message would carry the differential information and support this 1 meter type operation. So we had the money from the Coast Guard, and I put out an RFP, and one of the proposals came in from Worcester Polytechnic, from some professor named Enges. And we looked at the proposal and realized he had great experience in Loran. He understood hardware, and he would have a PhD, so he was very highly technical. So we gave him this program to work on, this contract. And I suspect you may have gotten paid from that contract, possibly. I think so. So, as it turns out, he did a fantastic job. He had to ask a bunch of questions, and his group did a lot of research. They came up with cost estimates. They came up with which station around the United States should be done, and techniques for error correction, coding, modulation, etc. And based on that, by the time the Coast Guard he and his group had established the feasibility very soundly, so they committed the money, and shortly after GPS became operational, the Coast Guard put in place a radio beacon-based differential system. Shortly followed by the whole world, basically places all over the world doing using the same technique. And so what you're seeing is that Per Enges had an influence before WAS, which is what most of you are familiar with, and he really made a fantastic contribution. And of course, I watched this all happen. I saw this man with great enthusiasm, great intelligence, and what I really liked in this case was he was both good at the theoretical stuff and good at the practical stuff, and it showed in the highly successful program that he put in. So I felt so good when I saw that this launched him into the GPS world, and I saw what he has done since then. It's just totally verified my instincts at the time. So I'm just so privileged that I was one of his colleagues and friends. Just wanted to let you know that.
So 1993 was a very good year for me. I defended my thesis, I got married, I came back from my honeymoon, and met a visiting professor for the very first time. So Brad had lured Per to come visit. I turned in my thesis, got signatures, and I was hired by Brad also to work on this project. And Per was made to supervise the project. And so for me, having just gotten a PhD in physics, I hadn't quite settled down what I was going to do, so this seemed like a good opportunity to get something done. This would be a short-term project. But you know, when you start working with someone like Per, you don't give that up easily. You know, you really, you know, it's something you really want to hold on to. And so 25 years later, I'm still here, obviously. Nick, thank you so much for your fabulous presentation. I wish I'd seen that before. I realized you were 5 when you moved there, so you have an excuse. But what I hadn't realized at the time was my degree is in physics, theirs in electrical engineering. And so we had an awful lot of back and forth over which was a superior education. And you know, I knew the answer, but it turns out that this is clearly the continuation of a discussion he's had for quite a bit longer in his life. I only learned much later on that his father, Harold, was a nuclear physicist. It would have been nice to get the 3 of us together because I'm I'd also like to say, you know, looking through this stuff, how glorious is that mustache? You know, you mentioned you miss Per. I miss Per terribly, and look at these pictures too. You know, that mustache was glorious. And, Per has done so many accomplishments, as Brad mentioned. The WAS, LOS. He's been instrumental on the development of A-Ring. Rudy, obviously, the differential GPS, Coast Guard system. But really, that's not why this room is full. This room is full because Per was such a warm, wonderful human being. He was such a people person. And, you know, I've heard from so many people just writing me, and the one common thing they'll tell me is when you were with Per, you had his full attention. Right? You felt like you were the most important thing on his mind right then. And I think that really carried through. I mean, Per really did that, in that he really connected with people. He was such a people person. I think the deep connection he has is why he has so many friends, why we're so, you know, why we're doing an event like this. And, you know, I think it's just such a wonderful thing for us who got to know him. He also really taught me the importance of having balance in that. You know, his family was so important to him. You know, it's all obvious. I remember when my son was born, you know, you mentioned the nervous father in there, and I remember going to Per, and he would reassure me. He said, you know, it just gets better and better. There's never a bad time. It gets better and better and better. And that really was the way he approached life. You know, he was such an optimist. But it is funny because Brad mentioned the dark Norwegian side, because he also had the dark sense of humor. You know, and when we were working on the certification of WAS, and we're in that 2-year period of time, and things looked kind of dark, and I wasn't sure how they were going to work. And I'd go down to Per's office and talk to him, and he'd always say, well, actually, it's a lot worse than you know. And he laughed so hard, he'd practically fall out of his chair. You know, that was Per. I mean, that laugh was just so enormous. And it's just something that helps me get through. So now, you know, I definitely find myself, you know, what would Per say to this? And it would probably be something dark, you know, like nothing so bad it can't be made worse, you know, something along those lines. So he'd say things like that. Those stick with me. I find myself in times, and all of a sudden one of his phrases comes to mind, and they help me get through the day. So thank you.
So I came to Stanford in 1994, a few years after Per came. Not his first PhD student, but one of his early students. I didn't really expect to be here 20-some years later, but it's in great measure due to him. He Nick talked about how good a father he was. He was a great father to us academically. He always looked out for each and every one of us. He gave that a lot of thought. I remember after he passed, a lot of people contacted Todd and myself about it, and they shared their stories. And I've heard so many stories where I never knew that his students, people I knew here, or his students, they were on the verge of dropping out of the PhD if they weren't prepared. And he's stepping in, talking to them, and helping them through it. And that's also a reflection that he never talked about that. He's such a humble person. It was a great honor to work with him because first a student, and then I transitioned to staff, and then I worked with him. It's hard for me to say it with him as my boss. He never treated us that way. He always tried to treat us as equal, if not more so. Like, oh, you guys know it. You guys handle it. He never. He was one of the most. He was one of the brightest guys I knew, but one of the most humble persons I've known. And so that's the incredible thing about him. And speaking of his love for his family, I think a lot. You could see that a lot. When I had my daughter, it was great to have him around. I walked to his office every couple of days and talked about work, and then we chit chat a little bit. And he always gave me little tidbits of advice. And as a family, he said, 99% of the work is just being there. And so don't worry about it. Just be there. Just be there for her, for your daughter. And really, that's very true. I appreciate all that he's done. Another thing that he did looking out for us is always made sure that we had opportunities to grow and expand. I remember he always pushed me that he gave me opportunities to do lots of things I didn't think about. I kept talking about doing, you should follow patent on this. You should go through Stanford and follow patent. Or you should go to these meetings that Brad is chairing. You'll really enjoy it. And if you haven't been in a meeting where Brad chairs, he's an incredible chairperson. So all these experiences that he really encouraged me to do, I really appreciated. He was trying to really foster my growth. And then we did a startup together, and that startup, we did okay. The startup was named after a nickname Eric had for Elaine. So you see how close to his heart his family was. Really was deep. We eventually sold the assets of that startup and had a good time with that. And that's one of my fondest memories up here. So Tom arranged, who's part of this startup, he arranged this dinner for us. And Tom's wife is incredible. She knows all the good places to eat. So she arranged this restaurant in San Francisco called Fairlawn. And so he arranged a limo to pick us up. And so Pear and Lena in the limo, myself and my wife, and Tom and Tom's wife, we were taking this limo down to San Francisco. Peter Lovin, very close friend of Pear, who probably will be here on Saturday, I'm sure. It's just great seeing him because it's just an incredible event because he's such a humble person. I don't think he'd ever do that in his life. I don't think we would ever do that in our life. But to do that and to have that, it was just such a moment of joy and to kind of, I just remember this warm smile and this warmth from that event so much, and that's one of the memories I always carry. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Bubeka Beramas. I am working at the German Aerospace Center, and I am the head of the Navigation Integrity Group. And actually this group started with the collaboration with Stanford University and PER and the team of PER. And now we are 12 people working on integrity. And it's a pleasure to have met Per and his team. And unfortunately, Christophe couldn't attend this meeting for medical reasons. So he sent me a short letter that I'm going to read for you now. Dear Hélène, dear Nick, dear friends, Per was a wonderful friend to me, my wife, and our institute in Oberpfaffenhofen. He has a big place in our hearts and memories. We do miss him so much already. I personally had hoped to spend some more time with Per after our respective retirements. Unfortunately, this won't be. It was in 2004 that I approached Per and discussed with him about our interest in augmentation systems. I had read some of his articles and was very much impressed by his and his team's work. The topic was a very good match with our broader expertise at the German Aerospace Center, and I wanted to go for it. The warmth with which Per welcomed my approach surprised and pleased me. Per accepted the invitation to give a series of lectures in Oberpfaffenhofen. We got carried away by Per's enthusiasm. All those who attended still have great memories of them. Per was very clear in his exposition and answered all our questions with the greatest passion. He was the expert and we were the newcomers. However, he never gave us that feeling. Besides joint scientific interests, we quickly discovered that there were other ones as well and visited places in and around Munich. Already during this first visit and on many subsequent visits. We started a cooperation which lasts until today and led to 24 joint scientific papers. The teams in Stanford and Oberpfaffenhofen cooperated and became friends, and we visited each other on a rather regular basis. Jointly, we could move things forward on both sides of the Atlantic. We shall continue doing that in memory of Per and because it makes eminent sense. At DLR, we admired Per and his achievements with his team. To quite some extent, Per also became a mentor to us and helped us shape our research in aeronautical navigation. We are very grateful for that and we'll never forget the privilege that we had working 14 years together. We will also remember Per for the joy with which he approached so many things, which often culminated with a warm and friendly laugh. Per always encouraged others to follow their own ideas and expressed a great respect to everyone. In this respect, as well as in the sharpness of his mind, we will remember him as a model. It was a wonderful time that we spent together, and I wouldn't like to miss a day of it. I apologize for not being in Stanford due to health problems. However, my thoughts are with you all, and especially with Hélène and Nick. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gabriel Wong from Singapore. I was a Paris research student as a doctoral research student, and I graduated in 2014. Paris was my research advisor, together with Dr. Todd Walter and Dr. Eric Phelps. So millions of people in the world today rely on GPS to get around. Well, maps have been around for a long time, but maps never tell people where they are. And once GPS came along, people could focus on where they needed to get to, as well as how to get there. So as a research student, we do have mental maps, research directions on where we were, starting point, and where we wanted to get to. But those maps weren't always accurate, and it could change over time. So for Per, as a research advisor, he was like GPS to us. He was providing navigation, and in a very critical context and very important information for our research. So, sorry. He was high enough above always to have the big picture perspective, and yet he was near enough to communicate that information to us in a timely, accurate, and relevant fashion. And Per guided without micromanaging. He provided insights on the thorny problems and the areas of potential impact, but he also encouraged us to pursue research directions in line with our strengths, passions, and inclinations. He also managed the lab in a collegial, collaborative fashion. If the research direction provided was not good enough or not sufficient, we could still rely on other navigational nav aids from people like Todd, Sam, Sherman, and other research affiliates and associates. These resources were like a gold mine on my research journey. They certainly made my life as a student much more rewarding and a lot less painful. But Per wasn't just a great research mentor advisor. I also felt he was an incredible human being. I always felt that he cared very deeply about the world around him, as well as for all of us students. He would regularly offer very insightful, pertinent, and practical advice, and all in a very honest, humorous, and yet non-judgmental way. Since Per's passing, the world does seem a little less bright. We would just like Per and his family to know that we continue to carry beloved memories of him. Per is always loved, always remembered, and always a part of our lives. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Tyler Reed and I was one of Per's students. I was his most recent student to graduate at Ford Motor Company. And I came to know Per really from starting at Stanford, and so I'll start with when I first arrived in the Aeroastro department. When I first arrived there 8 years ago now, I was met with the daunting challenge of trying to find a lab to work in. When I arrived at Stanford, my goal was to get my PhD there. But after many meetings with different labs and different advisors, that really seemed kind of like it wasn't going to happen. Most of these folks weren't that friendly, and it really looked grim. And after my first quarter, I was pretty much like, yeah, I think I'll get my master's and get out of here and move on to other things. But in my second quarter, I signed up kind of by chance for this course called AA272C, which, as many of you know, is the GPS class at Stanford. And Frank was teaching at the time, so thank you for that. And my motivation for taking this class was partly, as my close friends know, that my sense of direction is terrible, so I wanted to learn, really another way that we can do this. And soon I realized that atomic clocks in space made a heck of a lot more sense to me, so let's do that. And near the end of the quarter, Per came to give a talk to sort of informally recruit students to the lab. And I remember thinking, like, where's the coolest guy in the department been hiding all this time? And it turns out he was on sabbatical, and so it was just by chance that I took this class and got to see that, who this guy was and what this lab was about. And so he gave sort of the invitation. He said, if you're interested, just come to my office. Don't even make an appointment. Just come by. And he was really open about it. And so I did that. And from the very beginning, he was very accessible, very open, and he was really welcoming with open arms and very kind. And these are traits that I've seen sort of throughout the GPS community. I think he was a big part of making that so. And I called that lab home for 6 years, and really it's an environment that you can't beat. And I had the privilege of working with Per in many capacities, first as a student, and then I think as a colleague, and certainly as a friend. And I learned countless lessons from him, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And actually, the last time I saw him, we had lunch at the faculty club, where we had dinner yesterday. And Per had just given one of his signature talks. If you've ever seen Per give a lecture, there's sort of a high that comes with that. And we were meeting with colleagues from Ford, and we were trying to build a research project together. I had just graduated. I was very excited to be putting this meeting together, potentially building this kind of research project. And I was thinking I was kind of like feeling like an adult, and I was like, maybe I've learned all the lessons from the great man who's kind of brought me to this point where I'm actually making these meetings myself. And then I went to grab my bread at the table, and then Per looked at me kind of like, that's not your bread, that's my bread. You're at these kind of tables that are tightly packed, unless you know kind of dining etiquette, you don't know these things. But Per's reaction to that happening was, I think, says really everything about him. And rather than kind of call you out and humiliate you, he just kind of says, oh, you know, I never forget remember these things either, but he said, I'll tell you a trick. And he went like this, and he said, one side's for drink, one side's for bread. So you've already got it backwards, but you know, that's come in handy so much. More so than Kepler's equation. And so I think, you know, Per's final lesson to me was that the lessons in life never stop. I think that's a very important thing. And I think the last thing is, you mentioned sort of the meaning of the word père. Well, and I'm French Canadian, and so père means father. And I think that Per really was the father to all of us in the GPS lab. And so thank you for sharing it with us.
Good evening, all. So my name is Wei. I'm currently an instructor at the Air Force Test Pilot School. Unlike the majority of the speakers that came before me, I was a master's student, right? So I had relatively little time in the lab, 9 months or so, but we've continued to have a great relationship with Per, with the lab, as we go on. It's interesting how you can pinpoint points in your life where your life takes a pivot, right? You know, whether it be when you meet your spouse, when you have your first child, but definitely meeting Per was one of those points. To give you a orbital mechanics example, it's like getting a gravity slingshot, right? You know, where you get pulled into the gravity well of grades like Per, and it actually accelerates you towards a direction that you were not heading towards originally. So I came to Stanford on a DoD scholarship to study, to get a master's. Originally, I was not here to study GPS. I knew I wanted to do research, so I had met with a previous advisor. The two of us didn't click, okay? So I started scrambling for backup plans, and then I saw that, hey, the GPS lab sounded very interesting. Obviously, it's an Air Force system, right? So I was working for the Air Force. I still do at the time. So I scheduled a meeting to meet with Per. He said, yeah, come stop by my office, and within half an hour of chatting, I knew this was going to be a good relationship that we were going to have for a long time. We had basically scoped out all the research that I wanted to do. In the next 9 months or so, he put me in touch with Sherman, Gabriel, Yushin, you know, folks that I would work with in the next 9 months or so. So that's how I came to be a part of this community. I'm trying to continue those relationships. You know, we've done testing with Grace, and Sherman's going to bring us some projects in the next few months or so to leverage the assets, the testing that we get to do at Edwards Air Force Base, where I work, to continue on that legacy of doing research. And the fun of being at test pilot school is we don't have to worry about too many of the politics, right? Our job is to educate future test pilots and flight test engineers like myself, so we can scope research the way we want it to be and the way it should be done. What's interesting, I stopped into Per's office, and I don't remember the exact words, but my opening salvo to him was, hi, I come fully funded and on free labor to the lab. Which, I'm sure for those of you who struggle with funding, right, it's kind of the magic words. But even after I graduated, I came back for my first SCP&T afterwards, and I casually mentioned to him that I was going to be in town with my family. We had a son shortly after Stanford. He said, yeah, let's meet up, we'll take you out to lunch at the faculty club. You know, Yushin and I had sons within 2 weeks of each other, and he had this big old thing just for us, right? I have pictures of him holding our children, and that's a different relationship than I'm used to having with my bosses, right? You know, the typical fighter pilot types where if you go to them for help, they just swear at you, tell you to bring more air power to the fight. But, you know, at the end of that conversation, I still have a problem that you have helped me solve, you know? And that's just the kind of, you know, all of us have described it as that paternal relationship that we have as not just a boss, as a mentor, as an academic father figure, and I am certainly blessed to have had that. So When I learned of his passing, I thought, what can we do to honor a great man like that? You know, I'm not a GPS expert like most of you in the room, but what we do know at Edwards is airplanes. Okay, we have lots of airplanes, so I thought one of the things we do to honor great people is we fly flags on board these airplanes. So. I got it into my brain that I thought, hey, I should get this flag flown on all of our aircraft that use GPS. Little did I know that's quite a long list. And so I'll walk you through a little bit of this, but a funny story. We had a DC-3 on base as part of test pilot school curriculum. This aircraft rolled off the line in 1943. So we were going to go fly it, and I didn't bring the flag because I was like, it's 1943, right? There's no GPS on this thing. And we get in, and of course, there's a Garmin 1000 in there with GPS, aided by WAS, right? Systems that PEAR helped to do. So I guess I didn't get to practice a lot of the old school navigation techniques. But I'll walk you through, on the back of this is the log of the various flights that this flag has been on, signed by all the pilots in command, with a brief description of the mission that it was on. Echoing your family's legacy, the first aircraft that it was on was the F-16A model from the Norwegian Air Force. So it is an alliance that our countries have had for decades. This aircraft is a Norwegian aircraft that has been stationed at Edwards Air Force Base for many years doing testing for the F-16s. So it started there. They went out and they did a AIM-9X missile test. Following that, it flew on a US F-16D model on something called Project 1425. They won't tell me what it is. They do tell me that GPS is used on whatever Project 1425 is. Colonel Whitney, who since left, he mentioned that the B-2 is the Air Force's threshold platform for the next generation GPS-3 with MBUI. Those flights on the B-2, the only B-2 modded in the fleet, this flag was on board for that, on actually a live weapon drop for the next generation of B-61 tactical nuke. Because if tactical nukes are good deterrents, then GPS-guided tactical nukes are even better deterrents. So hopefully we never use those. The next mission was on a B-52, where it flew over to White Sands Missile Range, which the lab has done plenty of testing at Wismar, where it dropped a bunch of miniature air-launched decoys. All GPS-guided, they fly specific waypoints to generate profiles that help our forces stay safe. The next aircraft that went on was an F-22 air superiority fighter when they did another missile test for AIM-9X. Then it went on to our KC-135 aerial refueling tankers. And you guys who study air power know that the U.S. Air Force is so powerful because of our ability to power project, because of tankers like the KC-135. Then it went on a C-17 doing a handling qualities test to actually improve its capabilities to do aerial refueling. It's not easy to fly two aircraft within close proximity of each other when both of them weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds. So that is a new thing. Following that, it went on an F-35C, which is the Navy's model of the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. They were doing a new software job, right? So avionics testing, which no doubt includes navigation capabilities. One of the main things is enhanced geolocation, okay, so for our threats. The next two aircraft are T-38 and the C-12, and it was part of our test pilot school curriculum. And then the final aircraft was just a B-1, our supersonic bomber. So these are all the aircraft that it was able to go on within a roughly 4-month period. So this flag has literally flown on probably about 2/3 of the Air Force aircraft in our inventory. So I wanted to present this to you as a token and a legacy to a great man.